Hey everyone, this is Christina again with Phenomenon Paranormal Podcast. And I'm here today with Allie.
Hi.
And Anthony.
Hi, guys.
And we thank you guys for coming back. We've been having so much fun doing this with you. And we have a very interesting and popular topic today, which is UFOs and UFO abductions, recent UFO events. So it's going to be kind of jam-packed. I think we're going to start off today going with some of the earliest stuff that we're talking about, and that will be with Anthony over here.
Hi, guys. So obviously there's a lot of information, and I'm going to have some notes here to go over, but first thing we're going to talk about today is the infamous Battle of Los Angeles. Now, I know a lot of people probably think the movie with Aaron Eckhart,
Yeah.
but that's actually was inspired by the actual events. This actually is an event that happened a couple months after Pearl Harbor, actually. American cities were very tense because of what happened on Pearl Harbor. And in February of 1942, first there was an actual attack from a Japanese warship off the coast of Santa Barbara. And they actually launched several rockets into an oil refinery. And there was no casualties, but it was the first attack on mainland America during the war. Oh. So 2 days later, at 2 a.m., there was radar detected of some unidentified craft approaching the mainland outside of Los Angeles. And, of course, everyone was panicking. Air sirens were going. There was a mandatory blackout of the entire city, so everyone who was still awake noticed that the whole city was just cut off from power. And all you could hear was air raid sirens. The soldiers were ready for a fight. Wow. People were reporting seeing up to 15 Japanese warplanes coming towards the city.
Right.
So everyone was very tense. And so at around 3 a.m., the first shots were fired. And for an hour, anti-aircraft guns were firing into the skies at what they thought were Japanese warplanes. The thing was that the smoke and the glare from the fire was blocking everyone's view. No one could see anything, right? But they were so sure that they saw planes coming.
Yeah.
So they saw some sort of shape in the sky, some sort of disc. And other people reported seeing actual Japanese warplanes. Some even thought they were dropping bombs and paratroopers into the city. And at one point, someone even thought that a plane had crashed in the middle of Hollywood. Wow. It was just pure pandemonium, right?
Well, I imagine everyone's shell-shocked from everything that just happened in the war. And you got some hysteria going on.
Yeah, it's chaotic.
By the end of the hour, over 1,400 anti-aircraft rounds were fired into the sky. Thankfully, no one died from the actual fight, but up to 5 people died from car accidents and heart attacks because of the hysteria. It became known as the Battle of Los Angeles. But the thing was, in the daylight the next day, there was no evidence of any aircraft being hit. There was no evidence that any aircraft had ever been in the area. There was only one photograph captured when all the searchlights were spotted in one area of the sky. And people in the photo claimed that there was a saucer shape in the searchlights, that there was something emerging from the sky.
Right.
And from that, the theory that alien visitors had come happened, because it didn't look like any Japanese warplane anyone had ever seen before. But the government has since claimed that this photo was photoshopped at the time.
Of course.
You know, editing.
Photoshop back then.
I know, some sort of editing technique to get it into the paper.
Okay.
Even though this photo was printed in the Los Angeles Times, it wasn't like the National Enquirer or anything like that.
Right.
So you had some government officials claiming that weather balloons, ironically, released a couple days before, were mistaken for unidentified crafts at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Okay.
Because they were apparently silver colored. I don't know why weather balloons would be silver colored, but they were. Other people in the government, including the U.S. National War Treasurer, actually said that up to 15 planes had skirted the city. He was determined. He really pushed that agenda that 15 planes were launched from Japan,
right,
and tried to attack the city. He would later recount that statement. Mm-hmm. But the thing that always gets me about this, even though to this day, it's pretty well known that people were just panicked, right?
Yeah.
They panicked so much that 1,400 rounds were fired over the course of an hour. Nowhere in that hour did anyone say, hey, what are we firing at?
Right.
And 3-inch thick pieces of shrapnel rained down on the city, destroyed homes.
Wow.
Okay, what did they hit then?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's the Battle of Los Angeles. That was one of the first big reported things before Roswell
Right.
that occurred. And this one image is what started the very popular craze of people looking up at the sky, looking for saucers in the
Right.
sky.
UFO photography.
Yeah, that's where the film Battle of Los Angeles actually got the alien inspiration for the film.
Right.
Yeah.
Was from that, theory from that one
Fun
photo.
movie, by the way.
Yeah, very fun movie.
Really
I thought it was.
Yeah. Who doesn't like an alien invasion movie,
Of course,
right?
Yeah.
But that was Battle of Los Angeles.
Okay. Right, the inspiration that started it all,
Yeah.
right? All right. So next, though, there's something that we're going to talk about a little bit sort of lightly today. And when I say that, it's because there's so much information when it comes to this. But
Well, I think your thing was first, right?
I can go if you'd like.
Because I think timeline
Timeline-wise? Okay. So I'll go next, and then we're going to go back to Anthony for some Mothman talk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mothman's coming.
Okay. So my thing that I have to talk about is one of my, I guess, the story about alien abduction that intrigues me the most.
Yeah.
We hear certain stories all the time when it comes to alien abduction. One of the other big ones for me is Travis Walton
Of course. Yeah.
with
One of
the
my-
fire in the sky.
One of my favorite
Yeah,
favorite
Yeah.
stories.
that one, gives me the chills every time.
Oh, yeah.
But this one is sort of the OG alien abduction story.
Right.
And if you're, someone who's into UFOs and the alien abduction scenario, you've heard this story. But
course,
for people who may not be familiar, this is what started it all. And this is the case of Betty and Barney Hill. Now, Betty and Barney Hill were an interracial couple in the 60s in New Hampshire. That's where they were from. They were, very well respected members of their community. They were both members of the NAACP. Barney was just an average, he was a postal worker,
Right.
but he was also considered to be a civil rights leader
Right.
in their community. Betty was a social worker and was also an activist.
Right.
Right.
So, these aren't what people might look to and say, these are a couple kooks out in the community, quote
Right,
unquote.
right.
We're respected.
Right, very respected.
Yeah.
They were driving back, this was on September 19th, 1961. They were driving back from Niagara Falls and heading back toward, New Hampshire.
Right.
And, Betty sees this sort of glowing light in the sky and can't really tell what it is. And she's telling Barney, well, slow down. I want to see what this thing is.
Right.
At first, he's trying to tell her, well, that must be one of those new satellites, or, at first he thought, it may be even a commercial plane.
Right.
But she says, pull over, and they had a dog with them. We'll walk the dog, do its business, and we'll get a closer look at this thing. And so at this point, Barney still thinks it's something that can be explained.
Right.
They get out of the car, and he looks, and he's telling her, oh, Betty, it's got to be a plane. It has to be
Yeah.
a plane. And then all of a sudden, it makes this really sharp turn and turns around and starts heading toward them.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that is kind of a problem. Planes
Yeah.
generally are not going to do that. And
Yeah.
veer off their
Yeah.
course and come after a car in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So, at this point, he's kind of like taken aback, but he's trying to not upset his wife and get her, a little
Right.
flustered. And so they get back in the car and they see that this thing is kind of coming closer to them, but they decide anyway, they're curious.
Of course.
Of course.
And Betty's like, let's go down this road and we'll kind of see where it's going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they go down this dirt road to go see where it's going, and all of a sudden this thing speeds up and kind of cuts them off and lands on the road not too far in front of them, so they're forced to stop.
Right.
At this point, I think Barney said maybe 100 yards out. He has binoculars with him, and he gets back out of the car and he's taking his binoculars and, looking, and he says it looks almost like when it's in front of him that close, like a pancake. It's kind of dish shaped and more flat.
Right.
Saucer.
Right, but like a saucer. But there's almost like a picture window
Okay.
where he could see into that sort of eye level now with him, and he sees several humanoid type beings peering out at him from this window.
Okay.
At this point, he's no longer thinking this is something that can be
Yeah.
explained away.
Yeah.
And there's several things like that later he describes that happens at that point.
Okay.
But at that moment, he's just kind of like, okay, we're getting out of Dodge.
Yeah.
He gets back in the car, they drive home. Now, when they get home, they start having some sort of like strange impulses they can't really explain.
Yeah.
And, for instance, Betty suddenly had the impulse that she needed to get all their luggage and put it by the back door rather than unpacking and putting everything away where they normally would put it and putting the
Right.
suitcases away somewhere.
Okay.
And she couldn't really just, understand why. But with Barney, it was a little more intense. Barney had this urge. He had to keep checking his genitals.
Okay.
He kept feeling like something happened to his genitals, and he had to keep checking them.
Okay.
So, obviously then he's getting very anxious and things like that.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter, she starts, having these very vivid dreams of being led through the woods by, a group of something, of beings, men, she's not really sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And Barney is also being led a little further away from her, but he's like in this trance-like state. She keeps having these dreams, and they're being sort of led to this craft that they saw.
Okay.
So after this goes on for a little bit, and they can't really explain something that happens. It's pretty constant in abduction stories, which is missing time.
Right.
Okay, so we've all heard that happened in these stories. Well, what should have taken them 4 hours to drive home that night took them 7.
Oh wow.
So there's quite a discrepancy there, and they
Yeah.
couldn't really account for that time.
Yeah.
As far as they were concerned, once they saw this thing close up, they left and went home. So they end up doing a hypnosis technique that was really sort of on the fringe, I guess.
Yeah.
For lack of a better way to put it, to get repressed memories or, try and retract things that you can't remember.
Right.
So they try and go through this hypnosis, and these sessions are recorded. They do them individually. So, and at the end of each session, the doctor, tries to give them amnesia about what happened during their session so that they can't really discuss it amongst themselves.
Okay.
So those instances were all recorded. The audio from those sessions are considered to be some of the most chilling audio accounts of abduction ever heard.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're going to play one of those for you of Barney's hypnosis session. And, some people, even if you read the comments when you look it up, said either he's the best actor in the world
Right.
or he really went through something, because the terror in his voice is just, it's enough to give you nightmares. So there's that. From here forward now, they don't look for notoriety.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing that sticks out to me when it comes to this case. They don't try and make money off this. They're not going to the papers. They talk to family, friends, and some UFO researchers.
Okay.
But they really weren't trying to make a big spectacle of this, and there's good reason for that, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
They were community leaders. They were involved in civil rights, which in the 60s, that was a very, very volatile time and a big
Oh, yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
So bringing attention to something like this,
It would hurt their cause.
absolutely.
Yeah.
They're going to be considered crazy,
Of course.
Yeah.
so why would they want to do that? So they didn't. But in 1965, a reporter got wind of their story. They still don't know how, but somehow someone, maybe a family friend or
Oh, okay.
what have you.
Yeah.
So he got a hold of this story, and he did a story in the Boston paper, which then took off internationally. And all of a sudden, as they say, the rest is history. It's considered to be the first real account of an alien abduction in history.
Oh.
Wow.
So it's, blew up after that. Obviously, they end up doing lectures and things down the road. But unfortunately, Barney had a lot of health problems after this happened.
Right.
You know, from what we know now, it seems like he was going through PTSD or post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Right.
And he also started having ulcers. He ended up dying just 8 years after this happened, and he was only 46.
Wow.
Died of a brain aneurysm.
Wow.
That's so tragic.
It's so sad. Yeah. He was considered to be a really good man. How much of this impacted his health? I guess, you know,
Yeah.
hard to really say, but it does seem like it took its toll.
Yeah.
I can imagine. I mean, that's something that,
Yeah.
like, how do you come back from that after
Right.
it being so traumatic?
Well, especially after the hypnosis regression sessions that they had, you know, if he really feels like these things happened to him that he recounted,
Yeah.
it's absolutely disturbing
Yeah.
and distressing to anybody.
Right.
So, you know, I can only imagine what he went through. But
I mean,
Betty-
the trauma, I mean, alone, because you got to imagine they're traumatized twice because
Yeah.
they went through this
Yeah.
and had the memories brought back. But then someone leaked the information and they had to
Right.
really relive that the rest of their lives.
absolutely.
Right.
They couldn't just leave it behind.
No,
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's 2 times you're being traumatized by the
Right.
same event.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean,
So, Betty, however, she lived to be 85.
Wow.
She passed away in 2004, I believe. But she, after the story came out and after Barney died, she became a big celebrity in the UFO world.
Wow.
You know, she gave lectures all the time. She gave numerous interviews. She was still heavily involved in researching UFOs and abductions until she died.
wow.
So, in the 80s, starting around the 80s and going forward, skeptics left and right tore down their story.
Yeah.
You know, that happens, I think, in every case that you'll hear. Believers, however, consider this to be, you know, the alien abduction story forevermore. You know, that's never going to change. In the past 2 days, I've listened to more interviews with her
Yeah.
than I could tell you. I've listened to the hypnosis tapes. Like we said, they believed that something happened. These memories, whether real or imagined, they believed this happened.
Yeah.
And she's very convincing to listen to her talk, for
I
me.
believe it. And I mean,
me.
I feel like the people who are discounting them, it's easier for people to discount things that they don't understand
Absolutely.
because it's too scary to think that something unknown like that could actually be real.
Right.
You know, especially with what Barney went through, you know.
Absolutely.
No one wants to believe that
No,
actually happened.
you don't want to believe. I mean, if you can absolutely go and listen to these tapes
Yeah.
on YouTube. They're very easy to pull up.
I've
Right.
heard some of them. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're disturbed, chilling
Absolutely.
to hear
Yeah.
what they went through. I mean,
Right.
Do you see his lips move? Yes.
No, his lips aren't moving.
Yes, go on. He's telling you.
And he's looking at me.
What did he tell you?
Stay there and keep looking. And just keep looking. Just keep looking.
Could you hear him tell you?
Oh, I gotta pull these binoculars away from my eyes. 'Cause if I don't, I'll just keep staying there.
Could you hear him tell you this?
Oh, no, he didn't say it.
You felt he said it. Is that
I know. Just stay there, he's saying to me. It's
All right.
pounding in my head. Just
All
don't
right.
pull
Well-
the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right. All
Pull
right.
them down. Pull these binoculars down and run. God.
Right. I mean, according to them, you know, a lot of what they were doing seemed to be studying their reproductive systems and long needles, you know, and what with her was interesting is that they were taking this very, very long needle and inserting it into her navel.
Okay.
Okay. And she asked what they were doing, and they said that it was a pregnancy test. Okay. Well, in 1961, there was nothing like that, obviously. Years later, however, they would develop amniocentesis,
Yeah.
where they do insert a very long needle into your abdomen to check things about the baby.
Yeah.
wow.
I've had that done.
Yeah.
So, you know, things like this that hadn't been developed yet, or one of the things she recovered during her session was what they call a star map. And she was able to recreate this star map that pointed to where they were supposedly located,
Okay.
at constellations and different things in the sky.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, several of the points on her star map hadn't been discovered yet by our scientists until like 4 or 5 years later.
Really?
Wow.
So how did she know this?
Exactly.
So things like this make this story, I think, really interesting.
It makes it credible to me.
Yeah, right. I know. For me, I think
Yeah.
people are, there's always the middle of the road people, but for the most part, whether it's ghosts or cryptids or aliens,
Yeah.
there's absolutely and no way in hell.
Yeah.
And then there's some middle of the road. I
Right.
need proof type
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Of
So,
course.
I lean more toward, and one of my favorite people, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
There's nothing, I think it's arrogant to think that we're the only people
Yeah,
and-
I agree.
Yeah.
in this, not just our galaxy, with the many and many
Yeah.
and so on,
Yeah.
infinite worlds that there could be.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of assumptions are made based on what we know.
Right.
Like when we talk about even, okay, let's say aliens are real. A lot of people want to say, well, they want to be able to come to our planet because how would they have the technology and the means to do that?
Right.
But we're making the assumption that other civilizations have evolved at the same pace as us, that they have the same level of technology, the same material to work with.
Right.
These are a lot of assumptions based on only what we know. And of course, we can only work with what we know.
Yeah.
But you have to keep your mind open to the possibility that other beings could have evolved far, far faster than us.
Of
Right.
course.
Could have more capabilities than
Their
us.
technology is way more advanced.
Exactly. I mean, we got to keep ourselves open to possibilities. I think that's what our podcast is all about.
Right. Absolutely.
Is exploring the possibilities.
Yeah.
Even like the whole abduction thing. I think there's both physical abductions and abductions in the mind.
Well, we'll talk about
And we'll get into that
I'm
to a
sure.
little bit later. But that's the point. There are multiple avenues of this.
Absolutely.
So I like seeing the resurgence of Betty and Barney's story today, though, because
I do too.
I think in our modern time, they're finally getting a little more recognition than they did back in the day.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot more people are interested in it now. I mean, to the point where their story was actually adapted for American Horror Story
Oh,
in
yeah.
season
Right.
2.
That's right. It was.
Evan Peters' story involved a very similar storyline.
Yeah.
So their story, first of all, is that chilling to where it'd be used in a scary show like that. But it's also getting some of the recognition that, hey, this actually does happen.
Yeah.
This is a part of the American history that we know.
There's an interesting side note to this, which was the last thing I was going to mention on this case, is that Betty and Barney's granddaughter is a big time women's UFC fighter,
Oh, really?
Angela Hill.
Oh, wow.
She's like pretty top dog in her field there.
Yeah.
And she gave an interview recently to TMZ, I think it was in December of this past year, that apparently Michelle and Barack Obama's film company are making a film about the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Wow.
And it's going to be called White Mountain. And those are the mountains that they were driving
Oh, okay.
through. And, she would have loved to have been a part of it, she said.
Yeah.
I haven't seen, like, when you look at all these things, a lot of the cases, people who cover this case don't mention her.
Yeah.
And she said, I would have, if they had come and asked the family to be involved, we 100% would have been involved in it. She said, you have the first black man to report being abducted by an alien. You should probably talk to his family.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think.
So I'm
What makes that interesting to me is the fact that, of course, Barack Obama was the president.
right.
Who had more access to the possible information that we don't are privy to
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
than the
that's
president
true.
of the United States. So the fact that they're making a documentary on one of the biggest UFO abduction cases in our history.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It says something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I have on Betty and Barney Hill. I mean, you could go on for eons about all the information in their case. So,
Yeah.
Anthony, you were going to talk a little bit about the Mothman scenario.
Yeah. I'm just going to touch on one particular aspect of the Mothman case because the Mothman case itself is an entire episode waiting to happen,
Yeah.
which we will do eventually. But for this particular discussion, I'm going to be discussing the case of Indrid Cold, which has become one of the most infamous alien encounters in UFO history. So we have an audio clip from an interview that we are going to be playing for you guys. But the person who started this was Woodrow Derenberger. Now, this was in 1966 at the height of the Mothman,
Sightings.
sightings
Point
and everything.
Pleasant, yeah.
Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And and it's in the year's 1966. This traveling salesman, Woodrow Derenberger's traveling along the highway. A car comes up behind him and kind of speeds past him.
He sees the lights, yeah.
And all of a sudden he sees lights behind him, and there was something following that car. And now it's starting to follow him. And it gets to the point where it kind of rushes ahead of him and stops in the road, blocking access to the entire highway. And it turns this ship, this whatever it is, goes sideways so that nothing can pass through. And the interesting thing is he described it, he couldn't see any windows. He couldn't see anything. No lights after it had landed.
Right.
It was almost like a charcoal gray color. And this door just opened up in the side. And he's sitting in his car, just, terrified.
Yeah.
Doesn't know what's happening. And a man walks out. Now, he would describe this man as being kind of like an average looking man, combed back brown hair, kind of like a deep setted tan, almost like he had been, vacationing somewhere.
Right.
Or average, suit.
Right.
But he described the suit as almost being metallic, almost shined.
Okay.
And this man approached the car, and without moving his mouth at all, because he wore a grin on his face the entire time,
That's why
which
he
was
has
the
the nickname, right?
was the chilling part of this whole thing.
They used to call him the smiling man, right?
Yeah, the grinning man.
Grinning man.
But this grinning man approached and what seems to be telepathically said, what is your name? Mm-hmm. And, he said his name was Woodrow Derenberger, and the guy told him in his mind, why are you afraid? You have nothing to be afraid of. We mean you no harm. And he said, I am called Cold. And this would go on to be Indrid Cold. This was one of the most infamous parts of the Mothman case.
And just before I came to the intersection of Route 47, there was a car past me, overtaking me from behind, and following closely behind this car was this unidentified flying object. And as the car behind passed me, this object was following close behind it, and it swerved directly in front of my truck, turning crosswise. As soon as I had stopped, there was a door opened in the side of this vehicle, and this man stepped out and came directly to me, or came to the truck. He walked to the right-hand side of the truck, and he told me to roll down the window. He asked me to roll down the window on my right-hand side of my truck. And I had done what he asked. And this man stood there, and he first asked me what I was called. And I knew he meant my name, and I told him my name. And he asked me, he said, why are you frightened? He said, don't be frightened, we wish you no harm. He said, we mean you no harm, we wish you only happiness. And I told him my name, and when I told him my name, he said he was called Cold. That was the name that he was called by.
To hear Woodrow tell it, a day went by before news stations, the police, everyone kind of forced him to sit down in front of cameras and audio equipment and pretty much be grilled for half an hour about what he saw. And this guy, would later have to leave the area. He would kind of go into hiding, didn't come out because, he was very honest and authentic about what he experienced. He had an entire conversation with this guy. Yeah. He would later say that Indrid would come back several times over the years to come visit him and his family.
His family, yeah.
His daughter still to this day claims that she has contact with Indrid Cold.
Yeah.
Of course, how much of that, I don't know. But the Indrid would later claim that he was from a planet called Lanulos. He said that he meant them no harm, that they were not, the ones to be afraid of. And we'll get into that and during the whole Mothman case, but there's a whole thing with him versus the gray aliens.
Right.
But this encounter was actually seen by other people. That was the interesting thing, was after he had his interview done, people came forward and said, I saw Woodrow pulled over on the side of the road, and there's this big ship blocking the highway.
Right.
And some people actually saw Indrid talking to him, hunched over by the side of his window at his car. And he said, what Indrid just told him, do not be afraid. We will see you again in time.
Right.
And he got back into his ship and took off.
What I like about the audio from his interview, for me, if you're somebody who's just making up this crazy story for whatever reason, I mean, he either rehearsed this for, weeks on end or something, because it's all very fluid. It's literally like him just giving an account of what just happened the day before.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel rehearsed.
No, not at all. It feels very natural. He had no history of anything, I think, in his background that would indicate that he would just come forward with some crazy made up story.
Well, but look at where this all took place, was in Point Pleasant, West Virginia,
Right.
which is the Bible, belt.
Right,
This is
right.
people, and this was what made the whole Mothman case so interesting, is all the people who came forward with all this information. No one wanted to admit this stuff back then.
Yeah.
I mean, you admit this stuff in 1966, you're, pretty much cut off from the rest of the town. And this is what happened to him. He started getting hateful phone calls and harassed. His whole family was harassed. That's why he had to leave the area.
Right.
And John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, would later say that when they went to visit him again at his new home, he was pretty much hiding behind curtains, looking out the window, because he was afraid that people would come to his new property and harass him.
Yeah.
This did not do him wonders.
No.
When he came out with this story, even the book he wrote later, the Lanulos book,
Right.
that still he died in 1990, still in hiding.
Yeah.
He tried moving back one time and it just did not work out.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I think the thing, too, that, like, if you're somebody who's just watched the Mothman Prophecies, let's say,
yeah.
maybe you never read the book and you just saw the movie because it was a very popular movie.
Yeah.
It's still a fun watch, right?
Yeah, of course.
But if you read the book, there's so much information about that whole event, from the time that they started seeing the Mothman itself to the Silver Bridge collapse, Woodrow Derenberger. But there's so much more that's not in the movie because, there's just no time to put it all in there, number one.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of UFO sightings. There was a lot of cattle mutilations, dogs being taken.
Yeah.
Increase in paranormal activity.
Much. And then there was a lot of Men in Black sightings.
Yeah.
There was so much more that they didn't cover. But what they did do is they took what happened to Woodrow and they put it into Will Patton's character.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one who played, what was his character name?
I don't.
Gosh, I can't remember,
Okay.
but he was the one that, Richard Gere ended up on his doorstep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And then he later recounts his meeting with Indrid Cold.
Yeah.
Somewhere down by the TNT plant. Or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. So they took some facets of the actual meeting
Right.
and turned it into something else in the movie.
Yeah.
Which the guy did a great job. Love
Yeah.
Will Patton. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. And I think when people think Mothman, they're strictly thinking cryptid.
Yeah.
But yet there was a lot of stuff to say that it was maybe more alien related.
Right.
Yeah. When we talk about the case, there's a whole lot of theories behind what everything was going down was really about. I mean, you even had Men in Black in the town, which is another big part of the UFO thing.
Right.
Is that a lot of the bigger cases, you see these mysterious Men in Black show up, trying to tell people to hush up, do not talk about this.
Right.
And there were several people in the town who report that they were almost abducted by these Men in Black. They tried to grab them from their cars and pull them into the car.
Right.
So something was happening in this town, and that's what makes to me the Indrid encounter was always the most fascinating part.
Yeah.
Obviously the Mothman sightings were interesting and everything that happened in that town was interesting, but this very specific encounter with Indrid Cold is for a lot of people too, has always stuck out to me.
Yeah.
I agree.
Far beyond what the film showed. I mean, just everything that they talked about in that encounter.
Right.
Right.
Well, like you said, in another episode, we will talk extensively about that.
Yeah.
The Mothman situation and the Indrid thing and Derenberger's daughter and the book that she wrote.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot to be said there.
Yeah.
But, these are just some of the big cases that stand out that I think you can't really just write off,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's going to bring us to some present day stuff.
Yeah.
And
Right.
Allie is going to tell us a little bit, obviously, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that there have been a lot of things seen and shot out of the sky recently.
Right. So before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone to like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you just keep up to date with our new episodes of the podcast as much as possible.
Hit that bell button.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you get the notification when a new video is uploaded.
Yeah.
That helps greatly. So.
All right. So I want to get into modern UFO sightings, and I'm going to start with first referencing what happened in 2020, which was the Pentagon of the United States officially released in, the leaked footage that had been released prior of the U.S. Navy fighter jets and their cockpit displays that caught unidentified objects in the sky. And I believe there was also a water submerged one.
Yes.
Yes, there
right? What are
was.
those called again?
UAPs? No, that's what they call them now.
Yeah.
Or like
UA.
USOs instead of UFOs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this footage is very interesting. They clearly don't know what's going on, and they're saying that over and over again. They're like, what is this? You know, they're trying to figure it out, and no one has really been able to this day. But it kind of confirmed when the Pentagon released this that there are UFOs out there.
Right.
And we just don't know full details of who and what they are, what they want.
Exactly.
But it actually, for the first time in history, confirmed what we've long suspected.
They didn't exactly have a choice.
They
once
didn't have
the
a
footage
choice.
was out there.
Once that was leaked, I mean, it kind of had to be addressed.
Who leaked it? Was it Tom DeLonge's group that leaked it?
I believe they played a big part in it.
Right.
I just don't remember if they were the official ones to leak it.
I think so, but we'll have to.
Yeah, we'll have to. We're
that
gonna show the clips on this episode as well. It's just this happened in 2004 first, and then it happened in 2014, and then 2015.
Okay.
So this clip will show all three.
I love them.
And it's really interesting. You'll get to see what we're talking about.
Yeah, if you haven't seen these, you're going to really have your eyes opened, I think.
Yeah, it's something that's hard to explain away to me.
Right.
But in more recent times, which when I say more recent times, I mean like a month ago, we've had some interesting events take place. So we're going to get into that. So I'm going to go over the timeline day by day, which is pretty back to back. But to start, the U.S. military shot down 3 unidentified flying objects over a 3-day stretch in February of this year. So this was right after the Chinese spy balloon.
Right.
So that had invaded American airspace and was down on February 4th. But this kind of set off a diplomatic crisis in our country.
Mm-hmm.
After that, President Biden said on February 16th, after all of this occurred, that they likely served commercial or recreational purposes and that there was no evidence of a sudden increase in the number of objects in the sky. However, that's kind of something we're known to hear is something explaining away what happened, and the government does that a lot.
No.
Just saying. Because, I mean, why would they want to say, yeah, there's aliens, flying around.
Right, of course, yeah.
But I'm going to get into more details of why this maybe seems a little more off to me. So, just to go starting with the Chinese spy balloon. That started on January 28th. It entered Alaskan airspace, and according to the Pentagon officials, it later drifted from Idaho to the Carolinas. Mm-hmm. Then it was shot down on February 4th off the coast of South Carolina. Okay. So that was the Chinese spy balloon, and we aren't going to go into the whole politics of that. Okay. But we're going to go to after that. So that balloon first was the size of 3 buses and flying at an altitude of 60,000 to 65,000 feet.
And that was recovered, right?
That was recovered.
Right.
So keep that in mind when it comes to the details of these other objects.
Okay.
So 6 days later, on February 10th, an unidentified object was spotted in Alaska, and that was shot down by a U.S. fighter jet. Now, that one and all of these other objects has not been recovered to this day. So we'll get into that as well. But the object broke into pieces and was likely not a balloon at all. A White House official said the object was the size of a small car. So not the size of 3 buses like the other one, but a small car. And it was first detected on February 9th heading toward the North Pole.
Okay.
So
this is Santa.
It might be Santa.
yeah.
Right?
Maybe that's who it
We
was.
found him.
Maybe he went on vacation for a little bit.
Yeah.
And now he's trying to head back.
Yeah.
But on February 11th, another unidentified object was in the sky. And this one was shot down by an American F-22 fighter in Canada. And this was in the Yukon Territory, so it kind of borders Alaska. And a Canadian official described it as cylindrical and smaller than the spy balloon.
Okay.
So I think that's interesting
Yeah.
that it's totally different.
Right, because there are always these reports for ufologists out there
Yeah.
who see cylindrical shaped UFOs, cigar shaped UFOs.
Right, exactly.
That's a very popular
So
one out
to
there.
be described that specifically that way is
Yeah.
interesting to me. So the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said, while they couldn't identify the object, it had invaded Canadian airspace, so it needed to be shot down.
I remember the look on his face during that conference.
too.
Yes, it was very like,
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
what just happened?
He looked like taken aback, which
Yeah.
tells you something. If your leader's like that taken aback, you're
Yeah.
like, well, what's
Yeah.
going on here?
He's pretty good at, his press conferences.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
it was different to see him that way.
Yeah.
Right.
So after that, on February 11th as well, there was another unidentified object first seen in Montana. That was then shot down the next day in Michigan. This object was flying at about 20,000 feet and had an octagonal structure.
Okay.
It also had strings hanging off of it, but had no discernible payload according to U.S. officials.
Right. Right.
So on February 17th, the U.S. and Canada called off their efforts to find the remains of all of these unidentified objects. And they said it was because of the difficulties from the terrain and weather conditions. So at this point, they aren't looking for it. And according to them, they're not going to be looking for it.
The Yukon one I can understand because I know the
Yeah.
Yukon's a very hard place to go to, but these other ones, like, that's what's strange to me. Like,
Yeah. I would think that they need to go see what this is, which they
Yeah.
probably did.
oh, I'm sure they have
I feel
it.
like they're maybe saying they haven't found him, but maybe they have.
Oh,
yeah.
I fully
And
believe that.
they have way more information about what they are and where they came from.
Right,
than
right.
We're gonna know maybe now or ever.
Yeah, like we said, they were only forced to come out and acknowledge the naval videos because they really didn't have a choice. They
Yeah.
were already out there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are they going to say someone just, fabricated these? These were authentic, straight from the aircraft
Yeah.
videos.
Right.
But if you can control a situation ahead of time before any footage or anything gets out,
Yeah.
you could say it's pretty much anything, or
Right.
it's nothing, or we don't have it, right?
Right.
Well, it's funny because a lot of TikTokers have come forward with video evidence that of Alaska and Lake
Oh,
Huron,
really?
Yeah.
claiming that they caught the UFOs on camera,
Right.
but then the videos were taken down.
Yeah.
And now the threat of TikTok being taken down altogether and across the country
Right.
is happening. It's just all the signs point to something is being covered up. What it is,
Right.
I don't know. But it's interesting that this is happening again.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the whole thing is like in all the stories we've talked about today, there seems to be a pattern.
Yes.
And when these things come up, it's always about how can we discredit it? How can we explain it away?
Yeah.
Even I think it's interesting with the Battle of Los Angeles, all of that happened right after a huge event, right? When it comes to politics and the war and,
yeah.
and whatnot. And then we have this Chinese spy balloon. And then right after we have all this other stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's weird timing.
I mean, there's so many things that you could say. Okay,
Yeah.
like you said with Battle of Los Angeles, were they obviously just hyper aware of what just happened in Pearl Harbor and so
Right.
something's in the sky and they're just going to shoot it down.
Yeah.
Right, so you could say that and then relate it to what we're going through now.
Right.
We've got the war in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of political tension. We have the Chinese spy balloon.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we see these other things in the sky. Well, when Biden said, yeah, there's actually no uptick in the number of, UABs or whatever that we see in the sky. Yeah, but there's a definite uptick to the number that have been shot down.
Yeah.
exactly.
We're not always shooting them down. Now,
If that's common behavior, why are we
Right,
suddenly
yeah.
shooting them down?
are we shooting them down because we're worried about being spied on more so because of what happened with the Chinese spy balloon
Yeah.
and everything going on in the world? And that's why we're automatically just, shoot it down.
Yeah.
Or is it because they don't know what this thing is.
Yeah.
And they want to shoot it down because,
The interesting thing is they were asking John F. Kirby, who's a spokesman for the National Security Council, if the United States overreacted in shooting the objects or had any regrets. And he said absolutely not. Given the situation we were in, the information available, and the recommendation of military commanders, it was exactly the right thing to do at exactly the right time. So it goes, okay, if they're sure they're not overreacting, then what was it, though?
I remember when the third one was shot down, whoever was giving a press conference for the White
woman
House.
You're talking about?
No, a man.
Oh, a man.
He was like on the actual council. He was giving his conference from Brussels, which
That's
is
right.
where NATO is.
Right.
Which is interesting why he was there at that time.
Yeah.
When this was happening in our country.
Right, because there were ones in other countries as well that we're not even touching on.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think all this happened at the same time. You sit there, and of course, if you're somebody with either an active imagination or who's seen Independence Day, all these other movies, you're thinking, oh, they're coming at us from all sides, right? So why are they in NATO? Is it political or is it otherwise?
Yeah, it's a
what
good
are we
question.
doing?
Ray, have you seen these videos that Allie was talking about of these UFOs?
I've heard of them, but I've not seen them, and I have
you
homework to do now.
Yeah, I mean,
You have to.
I mean,
pretty crazy.
Yeah, and the number of like airline pilots who have come forward over the years. I mean, these are official, both government and private pilots.
Yeah.
Who have all said that they've spotted these things on their radar and through the windows of their craft.
Right.
I mean, what they are, I don't know. I mean, could it be advanced tech from our other nations? Possibly.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, we're talking about all the way from the Battle of Los Angeles on. These have been seen. And the radar, I think the interesting thing was the radar was brand new tech back in Battle of Los Angeles. I mean, literally months after it was developed, it was being used for defense of American cities. And soldiers on the line at that time actually said, like, hey, we're following orders. We were told to start firing.
Right.
Yeah.
So whoever the higher ups were at the time were giving orders to start firing at something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there are things out there. I think is the bottom line. I've seen a lot of different videos that leave me scratching my head. To me, there's a lot of fake stuff out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yeah.
But there are major differences between them and like the naval videos, for instance.
Yeah, things you can't
major
explain
differences.
away as easily.
Right, absolutely. There's the types of UFOs that you see, and I know that we're supposed to call them UABs now, so please don't come at me in the comments. I get it, but I grew up on UFOs. So that's what they are to me. But the kind that look like like an octopus in the sky that's moving with tendrils and.
That's what the whole movie Nope was.
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Great film, by the way.
Oh yeah,
But
that was a good film.
I mean, there's the theory that they're living creatures in the sky.
Right.
Some look like jellyfish, some look like whales. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's from our perception. I
Right.
mean, it's all a matter of perception, really.
They're the ones that look like actual witches flying around. Up in the
Look
sky.
that up. Look up Bruja
Yeah.
flying in the sky.
Yeah.
Those videos are weird. Some look like they could be.
Problem for me.
Yeah, I mean, some you could say those are probably balloons, but there are some where they fly at the same elevation the whole time.
Yeah.
Across the sky over the course of a couple hours, and you're like, what
how
am
do
I
you-
watching here?
How are we faking these?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of the curious thing. Or the ones I like recently that I saw on TikTok were these guys in a parking lot who saw these things that they thought were like plastic bags, like all flying around the parking lot in the distance,
Yeah.
and they didn't know what it was, and they drove closer, and they look like clouds, but more solid is the only way I could describe it.
Okay.
Almost like
I've seen those. Yeah.
yeah, and they're literally floating, above the ground, and tons of them in this parking lot.
I see they go like right up to it
Yeah.
and like kind of follow it. And I'm
Right,
like,
and but yet they weren't clouds, but it
Okay.
was very strange. Very
Yeah.
strange.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of weirdness in this world.
Yeah.
Which is why we're doing this podcast.
Exactly.
yeah.
I know that we're encroaching on our time. So there is one thing that Anthony brought up earlier that you got 5 minutes, maybe 5, but about the abduction experiment.
Yeah. Well, Okay, try for 5 minutes. Okay.
Maybe 10. We'll give you 10.
The basics, okay. We've mentioned them before. You know how last week we talked about the Estes method and Carl and Connor develop it. Well, the team that they work with, the Newkirks and the Traveling Museum, they had developed a show called Hellier. And in the second season, they talked about an experiment they had done for their museum one time called the Alien Abduction Experiment. And pretty much they had an expert, I think his name was Lonnie Scott, come in to do kind of like a hypnosis experiment. But instead of trying to draw memories out that he already had, he was implanting a memory of sorts. Not a specific memory, but he kind of just told him in this hypnotic state, this man, that you are in a place, you don't know where you are, and you know that you're going to be abducted. And that's it, right?
That's it.
That's all he told him. And then he let the man go from there. And in that experience, it's one of the most, chilling videos I've seen of an experiment like this. And you have to be very careful. You have to make sure everyone is, consenting to this, because it can really change your state of mind.
Yeah.
About how you think about things. He was not a believer in UFOs beforehand.
No.
Afterwards, he is 100% sure that UFOs exist and that he's been abducted before.
That's key.
Now, of course, there's a lot of ethical questions about it, but you have to be very careful. But pretty much, he had a recounting of an entire story of being with a group of people, a ship, a light from the sky landing. It's a ship, and they are all led on the ship, and he and this whole group of people are almost like on a conveyor belt of sorts, and they see these very pale, sickly jellyfish-like beings behind glass windows. And I mean, we won't go into the whole thing. I will recommend the video.
I recommend watching it if we can get a link.
Yeah, we'll try and include a link. But at the end of it, they all get off the ship, and the guy notices, he's the only one who apparently notices that one of them is missing. A woman is missing.
Right.
And then he wakes up, and he's just in tears. Like he's got tears going, and he's convinced that it's been hours, and in reality, it was only a 20-minute session.
Right.
And he lost so much time.
That it was only 20 minutes.
And years later, he does not remember what he said. He knows what he's seen on video, but he cannot, for the life of him, recall it himself having experienced these things. But he knows in his head that he has been abducted before.
Now, that day when they were doing this experiment, they planned to do this experiment, but he wasn't the original person who was going to sit down and do this experiment. The person who was supposed to do it didn't show up.
Yeah.
So he sat in as a non-believer, thinking, he's not even thinking he could be hypnotized.
Yeah.
And where was this experiment done?
When?
No, where?
Where? Oh, I don't remember now.
The Brown Mountains.
Oh, yeah, in the Brown Mountains of North Carolina.
Which, if you're a UFO enthusiast, like we are,
notorious.
Infamous for UFO sightings. Lights above the mountains of the area, the Brown Mountains.
Yeah. The interesting thing for me, because that was the whole purpose of their experiment, to see if, because their theory working theory at the time is whether or not these abduction scenarios happen in the mind more so than they're physically taken up somewhere.
Right.
And that was the whole thing behind it. So, but watching it, that was the most interesting thing, was that Lonnie, the hypnotist, he doesn't tell him any of the details that he's given back.
No.
I mean, he literally just gives them like maybe one or two direction, like Anthony said, and then he came back with the most elaborate story.
And it kind of goes to that theory that, and what Alan Greenfield, who they were interviewing when they talked about this experiment at the time, posed to them is that, have you thought about that he may have been describing an event he actually experienced before?
Right.
And that makes you wonder how many people around the world have experienced abductions in their mind.
Right.
In their dreams and in a non-conscious state.
Right.
But they just don't remember it. And that's just waiting. I mean, we talked about the Frank's box, and when we were talking about the Estes method last week, well, the thing with the Frank's box is that it was developed to communicate with aliens or ultra-terrestrials. It wasn't originally developed for ghosts. And so the fact that it does get both ghosts and supposedly aliens or ultra-terrestrials, whatever you want to call them, makes you wonder, do these alien beings only exist physically on our physical realm, or have they developed technology or a knowledge that they can traverse multiple worlds?
Yeah. Communicate telepathically.
So these experiments that people experience, and yet they go, well, I don't have any physical scars. Well, maybe it wasn't done physically to you. Maybe
Right.
something your astral self or your thought self experienced
Right.
on another plane. So
This
Really
just got
interesting.
really deep.
Yeah,
Yes.
it did.
food for thought, guys.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but I don't want to forget to mention that we are going to have our merch store up.
Yeah, very
So
exciting.
you're going to be able to help support this show and wear your Phenomenon Paranormal podcast gear proudly. It's going to be some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
so we'll
sure.
have links here. And, you
And
guys,
it will be size inclusive
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
it's going to
really
be
great.
size inclusive for everyone. So please be sure to check that out. And then we also have something else too.
Yeah, very exciting. Another way you can help support the show and support us is we're going to be developing a Patreon page, which we're very excited about.
Yes.
Patreon is going to be the place where you can get exclusive behind the scenes videos. We're going to actually be posting investigations there as well. We're going to be going and investigating different locations, graveyards, places.
Do live investigation.
Life investigations. We're going to try and do at least once a month members exclusive live stream
Yeah.
where you can ask us questions.
Right.
We'll do an experiment during the live stream.
Right.
Talk about a case that we haven't talked about on the podcast yet. Maybe we'll release an exclusive podcast episode on the Patreon that only patrons will be able to get to listen to
Absolutely.
or watch. But yeah,
previous EVPs, things like that.
yeah,
that we don't
evidence. Maybe if we have people send us artifacts, you'll get exclusive access to the artifact.
Yes.
Of
If
course,
you have haunted objects that you do not want sitting around your house,
Yeah.
or you think you have an object with an attachment, reach out to us because we will take it, investigate it, see what's making it tick.
we'll treat it properly. We'll handle it with care.
Right.
Maybe we'll feature it on the podcast itself or our Patreon.
Right.
But yeah, that's all the stuff and more you'll get with Patreon. You might even get a special discount for our store.
Absolutely.
So make sure you sign up for Patreon and help support the show, and we'll get some great content going for there.
All right.
So thank you guys. What are your guys' thoughts on UAPs, UFOs? Let us know in the comments of the podcast. And next week, we've talked about it a bit here on the show today, but we're going to be discussing the infamous Mothman case. Everything involved in it. Paranormal,
So much.
UFOs, cryptid sightings. I mean, I think there's even a couple sightings of Bigfoot at the time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that went into this case, and we're going to discuss everything involved in the Mothman case. So
All right.
stay tuned for that. Thanks, guys, for talking with us today.
Yeah, it was great
you.
fun today.
Thank you, Ray. And
Of course.
yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Remember, don't fear the unknown.